We are Turtlesoft, an independent game studio that is working on creating a game for our capstone. Our game is a sci-fi horror game where you play as a stressed, underperforming college student tasked with joining a research project to bolster your failing grade. During this, the creature you are working with escapes its containment, and you must escape the research station while attempting to figure out what went wrong.
To keep this project on track and to fight against feature creep, we put together some basic objectives for this game. First, a basic third-person character control. Second, an inventory system that would store items that would both heal the player and aid the player with progression. Third, an anxiety system that would simulate fear response in the game's character. Fourth, a monster that would be able to find the player and attack the player on sight. Fifth, a win state based on the ability to get to a point. Sixth, a fail state based on the player's health and anxiety, if the player's health goes below 0 or if the player's anxiety is higher than 1. Seventh, this project must be mostly our own assets. Basic third-person character controls, and an inventory to store items.
Early in development, we decided to use a template in order to speed up the process. Many of the game design students had used this starter kit, and it would allow us to work harder on other segments of the game. The template provided the basis for the character controller, inventory, and the UI system. Both of these requirements were fulfilled in their most basic forms. However, we did change a large amount of the code and visual presentation of the template. We completely remade the UI for the HUD, replacing the progress bars for the health bar and statuses with a simple heartbeat monitor that changes from green to yellow to red as your health decreases. The inventory in the template was split into two different inventories, one for weapons and one for items. Early into development, we decided that we wouldn't give the player weapons, but we thought that we could pivot the weapon assets to make things like fire extinguishers. So we merged both of the inventories into a single UI.
An anxiety system that would simulate fear response in the game's character. This we had to make roughly from scratch. Thankfully, it was relatively simple, just a handful of floats within the player character: max anxiety, min anxiety, and current anxiety. We kept all three as variables just in case we needed to change them over the game, or we needed to quickly change them to balance the game. We then were faced with two player-facing questions: how do we modify anxiety, and how do we display the anxiety to the player? We debated how to modify anxiety, whether we would make bespoke items that would change the anxiety variable in the character, or whether we would make a more generic option. We settled on creating an invisible volume where we could set the increase or decrease of the anxiety variable. This way, not only could we easily create a large variety of scenes, but we could also theoretically create peaceful scenes that would actually lower anxiety. The second thing we had to do was display the anxiety to the player. This was more difficult because at the start, we thought that we would want to make it subtle. So we started with a simple heartbeat that increased in volume and frequency as the anxiety increased. Unfortunately, we had the problem that when we sent the game out to friends to test, they would return with comments of, "I keep randomly dying," which tended to boil down to them not realizing that their anxiety was increasing. The first attempt to fix this was increasing the speed of the heartbeat monitor that also acted as the health indicator. This was far too subtle as well, so we decided to make a couple of larger steps forward. We create a vignette that darkened as your anxiety increased, and decreased the contrast of your player's camera with your anxiety. This finally indicated to the players that both anxiety was increasing and that it was bad. A monster that would be able to find the player and attack the player on sight. The monster was an incredibly important portion of the game. Without the monster, the game would have no challenge, and it would be a horror game with no fear. This was one of the first assets we put together. We started by sculpting the monster in ZBrush, going through multiple iterations to create a truly alien monster. We then retopologized the model to optimize the polygons and make it riggable. We then rigged the model, not only to create a skeleton that Unreal could control within the engine, but also so that our animators could animate the model effectively. During this time, we also put together a material for the monster. We did this by first creating a scale-based material in Substance Designer. We then hand-painted the material into the model, making sure that the scales overlapped correctly and scaled correctly for different portions of the body. After those were completed, we moved on to the monster's animations in AI. The animations we created included an idle animation, a walking animation, and an attack animation. The AI was complicated, as our group members did not have a very in-depth knowledge of the AI system starting out. However, we were able to learn via Unreal's own tutorials, and a couple of tutorials on YouTube as well. One that bears mentioning is Ryan Laley's Melee AI tutorial. However, through these challenges we were able to persevere and make a relatively good AI. The basic AI logic is very simple. If the monster sees the player, it will store the player's location. It will then go to that location. If it is close enough to the player, it will attack the player, but if the player gets out of line of sight, the monster will search in an ever-expanding radius around the last place it saw the player. This allows the monster to follow the player and search out the player. Making sure our game was mostly our own assets. With the use of a template, there is a worry that you will not be making your own game, but remixing someone else's. So for this project, we created all of our own environmental models and textures, as well as heavily modifying the menu UI. We created a wide array of models from the basic modular tiles of the station construction system, to the more domestic dorm assets, to the scientific medical assets. We also textured all of these assets using both Substance Designer and Substance Painter, and we put together a color palette to tie the models in together. Some of the highlights of the assets we created included the station construction system and the activator system. The station construction was a modular system we created to make it easier to put together the game's environments. It is broken up into several segments: straight walls, interior corners, exterior corners, roof ceiling tiles, and sub-segments to patch any holes. They are specifically sized to make it easier to create hallways and rooms. These segments themselves are also broken into several sub-pieces that allow you to detail the environment and keep the environment from being too repetitive. To make the environment react to the player and react to other objects in the environment, we created what is called the activator system. The way the activator system works is that all objects are children of a single activator object. The player can interact with this activator object to switch a boolean on and off, but activator objects can be chained, meaning that you can activate any activator object with another activator object. Not only does this allow for buttons that can open doors and turn off lights, but can also allow for the doors themselves to activate other objects, leading to the ability for doors to turn on lights, and lights to open doors. Of course, there's no point in making all of these assets if there's no levels to put them in. So these are some explanations of the different levels we've put together for this project. This introductory level was created to introduce some basic mechanics to the player and demonstrate that things are falling apart. First, to introduce the movement mechanics, it gives the player a large empty space for them to move around in. Then, their eye will be drawn down this way due to the fact that the fire is completely contrasted with the architecture. Moving towards the fire, the player will be presented with three options: a window and two doors. Given the window gives the lowest opportunity cost, they will go towards the window, entering the anxiety volume and allowing them to see the keycard. This gives the player two bits of information. One, that there is a keycard there, and two, that the anxiety system exists. Then, they'll move on to the doors. They'll find that this one is locked, but this one is completely open, allowing them to access that keycard. They will then, assuming that they do not enter the fire and learn how the damage system works, go towards the locked door and open it up. Here, we have also used the contrast so that the player will look down the hallway and see the fire as contrasted with the geometry and should have to go towards it. But they will be blocked by these two pillars, meaning that they will have to learn how to crouch. Going through these areas, they will know that they can't go through the fire, but looking around, they'll be able to see the door and enter through there. This will also show, or this area will show how the station is falling apart behind the entrance area, with a lot of deactivated lights and flickering lights. Because they know that they will not be able to go towards the fire, they'll go further down the hallway, around the crates, which, if they bump into them, they will be able to understand that these have physics attached. They'll be then given two options, either the elevator or the bathroom. If they enter the bathroom, one side is empty, but the other side contains pills. This not only incentivizes later down the line going into different areas to search out different objects, but will also teach the player how to decrease their anxiety through pickups. After that, the only thing left to do is go into the elevator and end the level.
So, an update on what I've been doing is I've been working on modeling out the cafeteria level, and what I did was started by working on the rightmost and the topmost rooms. This level is divided into four rooms: a center, left side, top side, and right side. And what I did was I started by blocking out the right side areas, top side areas, and then told and Clay what I would need for those areas, such as benches and tables, and gave him the approximate dimensions. And then once he had finished the models, I replaced the blocks with them and put them into place. We can see the trash cans, tables, bench. There's also some miscellaneous stuff such as trash, plates, cups that will be scattered around here to give it more of a believable aesthetic. And ignore the lighting. This is obviously not the final lighting the level will have. This was just so I could see what I was doing. Ram is currently working on the lighting for the stage, and once he is done, I will import it into my file. And then once the blocking or the decorating the area with the miscellaneous objects is done, I'm going to be working with Emilie to block out the center section and the rightmost area, which is going to be a kitchen area. So that will be fun to work on once she and I get to work on that together and can finally wrap up how immersive this area will be. And that is it.
This is the test level that we use to test all of the assets and to show the production of this game. You can see it's been built using the construction system with a locker, a gurney, a handful of boxes in here. You can also test the activator system here with the lights that aren't on being hooked up to this button here. I was also able to use this room to test the lights, period. This was where I was able to test the stairs. And down here is the test for the doors, showing that everything worked. We have the fire assets here, for which there is a fire extinguisher in the next room. So is the monster. Just gonna scoot out of his way. Grab a fire extinguisher. And just show the assets in here. You can see the cafeteria table, the bench, foodstuffs, trash can. Moving right along, the domestic assets, the bed, the chair, the desk with books and lamp. Again, all rooms made with the construction system, all interactable assets made with the activator system. Hopefully, yeah, you're here. And off he goes. Just gotta get around him to be able to turn off the fire. Come on. Here are some assets that we didn't have a place for it when we were showing them off. Oh. A plant pod that we stopped production on, as was the original desk and chair, and the bathroom assets shown in the starter level. Moving forward, we have the test for the decals and the anxiety field, which I'm just going to swoosh right through. And here's the key card that will let me exit the level. Here we also see the medical assets, including the beds, the gurneys, etc. If I can just get around the monster. I cannot get around the monster. Thankfully, the way this is set up, I won't have to. I can open the door. and leave out the elevator. And that is our game. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you wish to play it for yourself, the link will be in the description below.